Iran's rulers have a deadly playbook for moments of political crisis. When the country is at war or facing mass protests, there's a surge in executions. It happened in the 1980s under the cover of war with Iraq. It's happening again. Since US and Israeli missiles started hitting Iran in February, the cost of dissent has risen sharply.
Iranian authorities have turned prisons in Iran into killing fields.
Raha Bahreini is Amnesty International's Iran researcher. She's an international law expert who's led investigations into Iran's treatment of prisoners.
It's very clear that with the methodical way in which they've been carrying out these politically motivated executions almost daily, there is a strategy of fear and repression behind it.
Amnesty International has published a new report showing executions globally have soared to their highest level in more than 40 years. Now, Iran is almost entirely responsible for that increase, making it the world's leading executioner outside China. Looking at Iran alone, last year it executed more than 2,000 people, a nine-fold increase in 5 years.
The 2,159 figure for 2025 is the total number of executions carried out last year. Half of them, nearly half of them, are for drug related offenses, several hundreds are for murder, and you have a number of executions for politically motivated charges such as enmity against God, corruption on earth, and espionage.
Did you catch that? Enmity against God. What does that actually look like? Sasan Azadvar was convicted on that charge. He was a 21-year-old karate athlete from the central city of Isfahan. During protests in January, Iranian prosecutors say he smashed a police vehicle's windows and called for it to be set on fire. That apparent incitement, in the eyes of the court, warranted a death sentence. But get this, the ruling also claimed his actions were carried out at the invitation of Israel and the US. We'll come back to that. But another of those recently executed, Saleh Mohammadi, a teenage protester and a national wrestling champion. He was accused of murdering a policeman, even though his family provided evidence he was not at the scene. Both young men convicted in a matter of days. Both, according to human rights groups, made to confess under torture. And more such executions could follow. Iran's police chief said around 6,500 people have been arrested since the start of the war under purported charges of treason and espionage. But let's rewind a bit, because to understand why the numbers are soaring, we need to go back to 2022, when Iranian women began pouring into the streets outraged at the strict religious policing of their clothing and behavior. They were met with violence. Lower estimates of the death toll are in the hundreds. Then in late 2025, after the cost of living reached intolerable levels, huge economic protests broke out. The result? Body bags lining the streets. According to UN human rights experts, at least 3,000 people were killed by security forces, though unverified reports put that number far higher. And now dissidents who are not killed in the streets are being killed in prisons.
There has been a horrific increase in the number of politically motivated executions. This is a pattern that Amnesty has recorded since the 2022 Women Life Freedom protests, when the authorities increased the use of the death penalty as a tool of political repression. In the aftermath of the 12-day war last June, we saw another horrific increase in the number of executions. Over 1,500 of the executions carried out in 2025 took place in the second half of the year after the 12-day war. And once again, since the Israeli-US attacks on Iran on the 28th of February, we have seen this unprecedented increase in politically motivated executions. The authorities have at least executed 32 individuals, who include protesters, dissidents, and those accused of espionage. And this comes in a context where the authorities are very clearly explaining that they intend to swiftly impose death sentences and carry out expedited executions in order to deter dissent.
Iran's execution rate began rising several years ago, with the regime stating it was cracking down on crime. But even in those mostly non-political cases, Amnesty says prisoners aren't getting due process.
So, nearly half of the executions are for drug related offenses. Drug related offenses are tried before revolutionary courts that are fundamentally unfair. The trials usually last a few minutes, and those accused of drug related offenses generally have no access to effective or independent legal representation if they have access to any lawyer at all. All these trials are systematically unfair, with courts relying on torture tainted confessions to issue convictions and death sentences. This is particularly the case with respect to trials taking place before revolutionary courts. These revolutionary courts operate under the influence of security and intelligence bodies, and they are usually presided over by judges who cooperate closely with the security system in order to crush dissent. The authorities usually hold these trials in secret. They do not even allow victims' families or even independent lawyers to attend these trials. State appointed lawyers may be allowed to attend the trials and meet their clients for the first time just minutes before the trials. International observers have not been allowed into Iran for decades now, let alone into these court sessions that are used as a conveyor belt for eventual executions.
A conveyor belt for executions. And much of what feeds into Iran's revolutionary courts happens in places no outside observer ever sees.
There are many detention facilities in Iran that are run by security and intelligence bodies such as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Ministry of Intelligence, and there is no independent oversight over these facilities. Those who are accused of national security related offenses are generally held in these secret detention facilities during the investigation process, where they are subjected to coercive interrogations for days or weeks on end in order to give forced confessions.
And conditions inside Iran's prisons are deteriorating, according to another NGO, Human Rights Watch. It says there have been shortages of food and medicine since the war started. The detainees live in constant fear, never knowing when their name will be called.
The authorities kept the families and the lawyers in the dark in advance of the executions. They did not even allow the families to say goodbye, or they sometimes did not even tell them that their loved ones are about to be executed. The prisoners made a call to their families, sounding completely normal, and minutes later they were taken from their ward to the cells in which they were eventually taken, from which they were eventually taken for execution. So the way the executions are carried out is also very cruel and adds to the anxiety and anguish of the families. Of the 32 who were executed in recent weeks, in at least 6 cases, we also received information that the authorities did not return the bodies of the dissidents to their families after the executions were carried out.
And even those not on death row face a different kind of state-sponsored threat from neglect. There are fears for the life of Narges Mohammadi, a human rights activist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Now, she was serving a lengthy sentence for speaking out against the regime, including against the death penalty. Recently, she was transferred from prison to hospital, with doctors saying she is in poor health. The war has created a double danger for detained protesters. Amnesty says they face the threat of execution and also of being hit in US-Israeli bombings. That's because many of the strikes have targeted police stations and Revolutionary Guard facilities, which also happen to be where detainees might be held.
During this round of conflict, the organization documented incidents of explosions near prisons, which caused immense stress and hardship among prisoners. We also learned about cases of armed attacks on facilities, intelligence and security facilities in which political detainees might have been held.
Now, remember the court accused the protester Sasan Azadvar of acting on behalf of Israel and the United States. That framing isn't unique to him. The regime has labeled many of those executed since February as foreign agents, spies, and collaborators with the enemy. And it points to statements from Washington and Tel Aviv to make its case. Before and during the war, Donald Trump openly called on Iranians to rise up against the regime, promising support from the US. So what effect does this have on the ground?
This rhetoric by the US president has been used by the Iranian authorities to further smear protesters and dissidents. The unlawful attacks that Israel and US waged on Iran on the 28th of February has worsened the situation of human rights in Iran. It has led to massive civilian harm, damaged the environment, and overall created further economic hardship for the people in Iran. What's important to remember, though, is that protesters and dissidents in Iran have legitimate grievances. These grievances have been at the root of successive cycles of protests in Iran since 2018. So, regardless of whatever the Israeli or US officials say, it's important to focus on the legitimate demands of protesters and dissidents in Iran for human rights, democracy, and dignity.
So far, the international response has been quiet. Diplomats keep their focus on Iran's nuclear program and its missiles, while the issue of human rights barely makes it onto the agenda.
The reality is that human rights concerns in Iran have been generally sidelined, with the attention of the global community focused on nuclear or missile developments. And in this context, the Iranian authorities have managed to carry out unprecedented protest massacres without facing any real consequences for their crimes under international law. So the people in Iran do expect further global solidarity for these very dark periods that they are going through.
Now, it's important to keep this in perspective. Iranian health officials say more than 3,500 people have been killed in US-Israeli attacks. That's just over 1,000 more than the regime killed in its own prisons last year, according to Amnesty's numbers. We asked Iran's embassy in Berlin for a response to Amnesty's report, but we've not heard back from them yet. When this war ends, observers will be collecting two different death tolls. One caused by the attacking enemy, and another by Iran's rulers against their own people, most of whom you'll never hear about. That's how the playbook works, in the dark. Thanks for watching.